Hello, and again, welcome to the Labyrinth Library YouTube channel. We are continuing to talk today about Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. We will probably not talk so much. This will be a short video, I think, because, I don't know, to me it feels like it's going to be a short video. I might be wrong. We'll find out. But today I want to talk about style and structure. I kind of want to talk about some of the things that Huxley did as a writer. And the reason I want to do this is twofold. Number one, as an English teacher, this is one of the things I have to teach my students, is to examine not just what the story was, but how it was made. And very often you have students who talk about the story and they'll talk about the characters. They'll say, oh, Bernard wanted to do this or John wanted to do that. And I have to remind the students, like, no. Bernard and John don't want to do anything. Bernard and John aren't real. They can't want. The author wants them to do things. Aldous Huxley wants them to do things. And one of the things that we have to teach students of really any art, not just literature, I think theater, music, visual arts, everything, is that nothing is random in art. Unless, all right, I'll put an asterisk there, unless it isn't. But especially in literature, things aren't random. Writers generally don't just pound something out and then send it off to be printed. It is considered, it is prepared, it is edited after the fact, it is revised, it is changed, and we can assume that whatever the writer has put into that text was intentional. That it is there because they wanted it to be there. And so in approaching any book, not just this one, I think it is worthwhile to look and say, well, to kind of take a step back and sort of ignore the story for the moment and say, okay, how did the writer go about creating this text? And it can sometimes give you some really interesting insights into the sort of experience they're trying to craft for us and the way that they're trying to tell their story. So, for the most part, Huxley's work is it feels fairly modern in a lot of ways. It doesn't have the kind of feeling that you might expect for a book written in the 30s, especially if you're a modern sort of 21st century reader. I know that the sort of standards and the the styles of writing have changed over time. They always will. And a writer of the 30s is not going to be like a writer of the 2010s or 2020s. But nevertheless, it feels still fairly modern and approachable and easy to read. That is not a problem. He employs what is known as the third-person omniscient point of view. If you slept through that bit in English class, I'm so sorry. But basically it means that the narrator of the book is outside the story itself. The narrator does not take part in the story. And the narrator jumps around from character to character. The narrator's not just fixed to one person throughout the whole book. And so that allows Huxley to choose when to give us information about what's going on and what's happening in the world. There are things that are happening which one character cannot know about because they weren't there, but we as the readers know about because, well, we were, in a sense. And that helps build up sometimes kind of dramatic tension or dramatic irony in that we know things that the characters don't know. And if they knew, they would probably make different choices. So one of those examples, for example, is the whole thing about Linda, who is John's mom. And we are first seeded that bit of information in the very beginning, where the gestation center director kind of tells a story about visiting the reservation and his girlfriend got lost. And then when we meet her, we start to put the pieces together about who she is, and then by inference who John is. And then when it gets to the point where Bernard finally calls out the director on what he has done, in that he has fathered a child, it's just kind of a really nice bit of an arc there. And it's even though Bernard reveals this for kind of malicious personal reasons, we still enjoy it. And so again, Huxley has seeded that information throughout the book so that we, the reader, can kind of start to put those things together. And when the director is all surprised about what happens, we kind of just go, "Ha-ha, you fool!" But anyway, so yeah, this third-person omniscient gives Huxley a lot of freedom in moving about the story and choosing how he's going to tell it. Other points of view, for example, your classic first-person point of view, is really good for what it's for. It is locked into one person and into one person's knowledge. So if it's a first-person point of view text, then you only know what the main character knows. And Huxley did not want to do that because Huxley is creating this whole big new world for us, a brave new world, if you will. And there's stuff that we as the readers need to understand about the world, which we wouldn't be able to get if he locked us into one person's point of view. You know what I mean? It would have to be a really, really strangely manufactured plot line in order for the main character to be told and informed all the things that we need to know about the world. Especially if the main character grew up in that world. If the main character grows up in that world, they don't need to be told about the assembly line process of birthing. They don't need to be told about sleep teaching. They don't need to be told about why we take soma. They know that. So, in that sense, a third-person point of view choice makes a lot more sense because it allows him to tell us a lot more about the world that we need to know. That's kind of the big thing about the narrative style that he creates. The characters that he creates, I think as I mentioned before, a couple of videos ago, he does a good job of creating a diversity of characters who are on that spectrum of happy with their lot and happy with they are versus not happy with where they are and not happy with the world that they've been in. So he's able to give us some good different perspectives on what it's like to live here. But one of the things that made me decide to do a video on structure and style is chapter 3. And I wanted to do this because I would like your help, actually. This is where I would like your help in kind of understanding chapter 3. So, chapter 1 he begins the book with a tour of the gestation facilities. He begins the book with the World State's motto, community, identity, stability. And he takes us on a whole tour of how babies are crafted, as it were, and then decanted and born. So that is Huxley providing us with that information that we need to know by way of like a school tour, right? The supervisor is taking a bunch of kids and showing like, this is where you came from. This is how everything works, right? So Huxley is informing us about that as well. It's a very effective technique. It is a classic technique. You might see that on a lot of shows, TV shows, for example. In their pilot, they might introduce a new character to the pilot, right? Like in The Office, the American Office and the British Office, technically, they introduced the temp worker. And that allowed the boss, Michael Scott, to walk around and say, oh, here's all the people, here's all the things, here's what we do, right? He's telling the temp, and he's also telling us. So in that sense, yeah, Huxley is doing exactly that. It's a classic writing technique. It works really, really well. And so he is able to take us through that whole process. Then we get to chapter 2. And chapter 2 is more about the post-birth training process, right? How are children socialized? We learn that children are given these sort of hypnagogic lessons where they are whispered things while they sleep that teach them the morals and values that the society wants them to have, right? About everyone belongs to everyone else. Boy, I'm happy I'm an epsilon, all that good stuff. We are taught that children are encouraged to participate in what the book calls erotic play. Huxley, bless him, does not go into any more detail than that, but what we basically get from that is that there is no sort of sex taboo in this world. It doesn't matter, and they encourage kids to kind of explore each other as they grow up, so that when you do get to an age where, in our world, you might be forming exclusive bonds, they don't care about that. They're like, it's fun, it's play, it's like exercise. It's, you meet someone, you have a nice little time, you go about your way. Not really important. So that's what chapters 1 and 2 are. They're setting their lore dump chapters. They're setting up the world that Huxley has set up. It's very effective in that regard. Then we get to chapter 3. And chapter 3 kind of effectively starts the story. And chapter 3 is weird. I think is a weird chapter. Because in order to properly process it, I had to actually go through and make some highlights. It jumps around from character to character. So it starts with, the tour continues. We see the kids hanging out, playing doctor, enjoying themselves, and kind of the director of the hatchery or the gestation center kind of referring back to the past, saying, did you know back in the past they would have, you could only have sex with one person, and everyone's real horrified about that. And then we begin to move to another chapter. Another character. We get to Bernard Marx, who I've coded as orange here. Bernard Marx, who is going off shift, he's finished work, and he's kind of interacting with his friends And they're talking about the girls that they want to be with, specifically about Lenina, who's going to come up. And Lenina comes up with, I put her in blue. Lenina comes up in blue. And so we learn a few things. We learn that Bernard, number one, is kind of shorter in stature. He's not physically as robust maybe as the other alphas are, and people kind of look askance at him. We've got Lenina, who is she works in the gestation factories, and she just wants to have a guy to be with and a nice time to be had. And in between each of these, we go Bernard, and then we get to sort of our history lesson, our social structure, our lore dump, as it were, and go to Lenina, and we kind of hop back and forth between those two things. You can see here, I've coded them as green and blue, and we hop between them. And then we continue with back to Bernard Marx, who likes Lenina and is upset that people are talking about her, as he phrases it, like a piece of meat. And then eventually laced in between all of this are these kinds of hypnagogic aphorisms. The old clothes are beastly, ending is better than mending, ending is better than mending, right? It's better to throw stuff away and get something new, or things of that nature. And eventually we start to get pages like this, where Huxley is jumping between character to character. He's jumping between the sort of history lessons and the sort of social lessons for the visitors on the tour, and Bernard and Lenina and these sort of sleep aphorisms over and over again. It is a wild chapter, and it made a lot more sense once I color-coded it, to be honest. Feel free to do that, by the way. You don't need my permission, but I'm just saying, feel free to do that. And by the time you get to the end, it ends with, this sort of chaotic chapter jumping from point of view to point of view to point of view. And it ends with, slowly, majestically, with a faint humming of machinery, the conveyors move forward 33 centimeters an hour. In the red darkness glinted innumerable rubies. That is the end of chapter 3. That is the end of our introduction to the book. That is our end of the introduction to our key characters and to the way the world works. After this, we start to get on a much more conventional narrative flow, right? We don't hop between characters like this after that. But anyway, it kind of made me wonder why Huxley did that. Why Huxley decided that instead of writing maybe 3 different chapters, here's my sort of lore, the end of the third of the lore dump chapters, here's my Bernard chapter, here's my Lenina chapter, he instead kind of cut them up and splice them all together. And I honestly, I'm not sure. It feels like a lot more work. But here's some of my theories. Here's some of my theories on this. We can't ask Aldous Huxley. He's dead. So if there's a Huxley Society member watching this, if there is a Huxley Society, please let me know what you know, because I would love to know it as well. But here's my thought. Number one is that if Huxley had given each one their own chapter, that certainly would have slowed down the narrative. And so by combining them in this way, that gets a lot of stuff done very quickly. So that 3 chapters in, the reader knows what they need to know about the world, and they're done, we can get on with the story proper. Okay, I understand that. Another one is that it allows him to link, we kind of get to link from section to section, right? Where the topic of maybe the green section, the world lore section, kind of links to what Bernard is going through, and then we can see how Bernard thinks of Lenina and how Lenina thinks of Bernard and how those don't really match up, and how Lenina's friends think and how Bernard's friends think and how those don't really match up. And we can get a sense of, even though the book is trying to sell us a world of stability and order, there are still levels of instability and disorder and uncertainty that are going to kind of eat away at our characters throughout the text. So I think this is a really interesting way of maybe juxtaposing those, so that when we get to the end of chapter 3, we, the readers, are kind of disoriented and thrown for a loop because we're not used to this kind of writing. And then it goes back into nice, stable sort of story structure, which may also, this occurs to me now as I say it, it may also be Huxley saying, see how nice stability and order are? Stability and order are great, aren't they? Right? I just put you through a chapter where you didn't know what was going on. Now everything's better. Now everything's normal. Isn't that better, right? So it might be Huxley doing a little bit of a trick with us to make us feel appreciative for what this new world is. I don't know. Anything else? About Chapter 3. Yeah, Chapter 3 was just weird. I had to read it a few times. This is one of those things where, again, if you've read it, I even looked up other resources on it, and there wasn't a whole lot that was terribly helpful. They just talked about how it's kind of various points of view spliced together. So if you've read the book, if you're an expert in the book evenly, because you can be an expert evenly? Sure. In the book. Let me know. Put in the comments what your thoughts on Chapter 3 are, because it is very strange. I can honestly say, I've read a lot. I can honestly say I don't think I've read a chapter with that many hops from character to character, except in books where there's like a battle scene, for example, where people are at war with each other, and the writer needs to go from, a character here on the battlefield to a character there on the battlefield. There it kind of makes sense. You get the sense that all this stuff is happening all at once. But here, there is no pressure. There is no sort of ticking clock on it. There's no real reason why we need to see everything all at once. So it is a bit odd to me. Did I not like it? No, of course I did not like it. It was interesting. It was a little weird. But Huxley did it for a reason, and I'm still not quite sure what that reason is. So I'm looking forward to finding out. But yeah, I think in the meantime, the next sort of last stylistic choice I want to kind of talk about is, of course, the use of the character of John, a.k.a. John the Savage, and the constant dropping in of Shakespearean language. John grew up in a reservation. He had access to exactly 2 books. One of them was his mother's technical manual in working in the birthing center, which is exactly as dry and boring as you think it is. And the other was a volume of the complete works of William Shakespeare. And so that taught John to read, but it also taught John about things like love and passion and sacrifice and heroism. And so all throughout his section, whenever we see John, he's always dropping in lines from Shakespeare. And I think that's really interesting. It is rather presumptive of Huxley, and it kind of suggests what Huxley thinks of his readers, that of course we will have read Shakespeare. And I think that I kind of like that he assumes, in the 30s, he's like, yeah, of course you've read Shakespeare. Of course you're going to get these. Maybe not all of them, but of course you're going to understand them. And that is something that a writer does kind of at their peril. Because, you can't assume everyone's going to know the cultural references that you drop in. But Shakespeare, of course, looms so large in English literature, it's almost impossible to get away from him. So if you are a modern reader, if you haven't read a whole lot of Shakespeare, if you didn't get exposure to it in your English class, then yeah, there's a lot of what John says is going to sound a bit nonsensical and weird, and you're not going to get the whole sort of story out of it. But I think Huxley definitely chose Shakespeare because Shakespeare is kind of in English literature and sort of Western civilization, is kind of a cultural touchstone and reminds us of our time, the time that the world of Brave New World has abandoned, that they have abandoned Shakespeare and everything Shakespeare stands for. And so I think that's a nice touch, right? That we today have passions and desires and wants, and we have ambitions that we can go out and chase and pursue, and the world will let us do that to varying degrees. So I think that was an interesting writing choice as well. Those are some of my thoughts on the kind of style and stylistic choices and structural choices of the book. If you have thoughts on it, if you thought this deeply, if you are one of those real good English classes students, losing my words, and you have thoughts on this as well, please let me know. But in the meantime, I think we'll do one more video. We'll kind of wrap everything up and some final thoughts, and then we will be done with Brave New World. So thank you for stopping by as usual. Feel free to subscribe if you want to keep stopping by, and I will see you for the next video.